Welcome to the Long Take Review, where four college professors talk film, providing insight, not assigning homework. I'm your host, Jen Chakchai Bankard, and I'm here with three witches. You'll have to decide who's good and who's wicked. First, he's full of loathing, unadulterated loathing. It's Greg Cass. How's it going, Greg?
Okay, let's get this over with. No, I'm not seasick. No, I didn't eat grass as a child. And yes, I've always been green. I'm good, Jen. How are you?
I'm doing great. I don't know why, but I didn't expect you to go with that. But I like it. And he'll help us be popular. It's Antonio Elphaba. How are you doing, Antonio?
Something has changed within me. Something is not the same. I'm through with playing by the rules of someone else's game. Too late for second guessing. Late to go back to sleep. It's time to trust my instincts. Close my eyes and leap. So that's by Elphaba, but for the rest of this podcast, I'm going to be a Glinda. I'm doing great, Jen.
Amazing. Bravo. That was great. I shouldn't have bothered trying to sing because I should have realized that you were probably going to and do it so much better. And last but not least, he's dancing through life. It's PT McNiff. How's it going, PT?
Being attractive is the most important thing there is. If you want to catch the biggest fish in your pond, you have to be as attractive as possible. Make sure to keep your hair spotless and clean. Wash it at least every 2 weeks. Once every 2 weeks. And if you see Johnny Football Hero in the hall, tell him he played a great game. Tell him you liked his article in the newspaper. I'm the party star. I'm popular. I've got my own car. I'm popular. Wait a minute. Oh, well, I'm seeing here, this movie does not contain a version of 1996, Not a Surf Song Popular. It's a different track. Well, sorry about that. I'm doing good, Jen. How are you?
Speechless, which is bad because this is a podcast. So if it hasn't become hilariously apparent, listeners, those were all references. Well, actually, they weren't all references. You ruined our opening. Most of those were references to the film we are here to review today. The box office juggernaut, the cultural phenomenon, the winner of Glicked, the next best picture winner, question mark. We'll talk about it. Wicked. In theory, this film is out in theaters now, but I guess word on the street is good luck getting a ticket. Maybe it's better now. Maybe that was just for Thanksgiving. But I just remember so many podcasters were like, I actually tried to go see this movie so we could record a podcast. And let me tell you, it was hard. So, obviously popular doesn't even begin to describe this movie right now. If you are listening to us for the first time, we will have a spoiler-free section designed for those who have not yet seen Wicked, though it seems like everyone has seen it at this point. But with a very clear alert, we will shift into spoiler mode for the rest of the show. PT, if listeners want to defy gravity after listening to this episode, what can they do?
If you want to hear more of our shiz, University, please follow the Long Take Review wherever you get your podcast. We host the feed on Substack at thelongtake.substack.com, but you can also find us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, Overcast, and more. You can also follow us on Instagram and Threads at The Long Take Review, and on Letterboxd, the account is at LTRPod, or you can search for the hashtag LTRPod to see what each of us individually have been watching. Jen?
All right. I don't know if we've recovered from that opening, but let's hear everybody's short take. What did you think about Wicked? And if you want to do it super quick, I just need to know, were you familiar with the Broadway show before seeing the movie? Because I think that is actually pretty important in terms of contextualizing your reaction.
I'm familiar with the show. I've seen it. As someone who liked but didn't love Wicked on stage, I was worried about its adaptation film. For every Chicago and West Side Story, we have a Dear Evan Hansen and a Sweeney Todd. But I thought this movie did everything I wanted it to do. I thought Glinda was funny, Elphaba was sympathetic, Defying Gravity did just that. dividing the movie into was perhaps a mistake, augmenting what perhaps could have just been cut. I still found part one to be a complete and rousing experience. What about you all?
As the person who went very firmly on the record a few weeks ago of generally not liking musicals, all you have to do is have some of the greatest performers around and a couple incredible songs, and a musical's not that bad. It's actually a great time. So I was thinking about, not to make it back to this like a wider treatise about musicals in the short take, but I was thinking back to the quote that Greg had brought during our Amelia Perez episode. I think it was from Lin-Manuel Miranda about how musicals are akin to action movies where you're just sort of like filling time between the big moments. And in thinking about that, I was like, oh, that makes sense, because I can enjoy like a B- action movie even if like the action's not that great and the story's kind of whatever. But like there's enough there. That's the kind of genre I like, in the way that I think a lot of people who like musicals can like something that maybe isn't like all the way there, or isn't going to win over someone like me who is like, it's got to be better. You got to be more than that. But I think there are things that can transcend your John Wicks, your Mad Max Fury Roads, that transcend people who don't really like action movies will like those movies. And I do think that, with notes, there's flaws, there's some problems we can get into, but overall, I understand why this is like the biggest musical of the last, or one of the biggest musicals of this century, which I had no access to. I had not paid any attention to. I was only vaguely aware of the title of a couple of songs, and it was a bit to do the 90s rock song in the beginning. But every time I've heard about Wicked for the 19 years or whatever, I guess it's 21 years that it's existed, I have always heard that song when people have been like, and the Wicked song popular. I'm like, yeah, I know how that goes. But it's not. It was the 90s song. So yeah, as a total neophyte and also like borderline antagonist to the possibility of this, I had a great time. This is a good movie. Successful stuff. Good job. Again, just make it the best you can, one of the best across the board, and it will be good. Greg, how about you?
So my familiarity with Wicked is relegated to the commercial when the tour comes to town, which just has Idina Menzel singing, "And if you care to find me, look to the western sky." And that's all I knew of Wicked or any of the music, is that one lyric, maybe a little bar of Defying Gravity. So I was probably the least familiar with this. I obviously know, one of the interesting things, maybe we'll save this for a rhetorical situation, is like when you try to track down what the source material of this is, you're like, it's a musical based, or it's a movie based on a musical, based on a book, which is based on a movie, which is based on a set of novels. And it kind of gets really kind of screwy where those different influences come from. But, Gregory Maguire is somewhat local to me. That's the author of the novel. So he's a fixture. My wife worked at a bookstore here in town for a number of years, so is not best friends, but knows him and has spoken to him many times. I remember during the pandemic, I went to a bookstore event on Zoom where he interviewed Natalie Portman, because she wrote a book of children's fables, and like they just like fanned out over each other, and it was really delightful. So look, I think we've established through our Letterboxd reviews that I'm probably the coolest on this. And it is not at all that I think it is poorly done. I think, it is a fun time. I think, I don't want to yuck everybody's yum. It's clearly a phenomenon. Being back at work this week after Thanksgiving, this is the only film anybody's talking about. And every time I heard a "how was your Thanksgiving" conversation, it was, "Oh, I took my kids to Wicked," or "I took my grandkids," or "I went by myself to Wicked," which is what I did. And my framing of this is I was seated by myself waiting for the film to start, and two teenage girls came down my aisle. And one, they realized they were the two seats next to me, and one flopped down in the one away from me, and the other just looked at her and said, "You," to the other one as she sat down next to me.
Wow.
That was the mindset I went into. I was
Rude.
like, thanks, teenage girls. And then she stayed on her phone the whole movie, so I moved away from her, which felt good. So now I'm the one who has the moral high ground. So I would absolutely recommend everybody go see this. And I know I'm ranting a little too much. It's a good time at the movies. It's a big spectacle. It's a lot of fun. But I think for me, the drags are the runtime. I think there are large portions of this that could have used a sharper editor. And I just found a lot of the kind of world building just a little silly for my taste. And I like some stupid things, so I'm not one to cast aspersions. But I mean, PT alluded to like Shiz University. Like we couldn't take another pass at that. Like we couldn't come up with a better name. And some of the little wordplay moments started to grate on me because I'm like, this is charming and the performers are great and the music is great. We don't need to, I don't even remember any of them, but we don't have to like create these confabulated words just to like be extra cutesy. Like that just felt like you're trying to sell me a t-shirt in, in the lobby outside. So those are some of my minor annoyances, but I don't think those are criticisms of the movie. I think they're at least criticisms of the show, if not the book that the show is based on, if not the book that the movie is based on, the book that the show that so Jen, what did you think?
I absolutely loved this. It was a transcendent experience at the theater for me. And just as context, I had seen the show and really, really enjoyed it. I've only seen the show once, and so the details of the plot were pretty fuzzy for me in terms of like, dramatic scenes and dialogue and stuff like that. But I had listened since I had seen the show live, probably in like 2008 or 2009. I have been regularly listening to the soundtrack, so it was like I was familiar with a lot of the music more than maybe the details of the plot. So I think I was in the perfect spot to see this movie because I had an attachment to it, but was still able to be kind of surprised by certain things. And for me, it's not just that this is really well done. It's that it is so smart in how it is adapting from live stage performance to cinema. And that part of that is the performances. Like I think Cynthia Erivo is so amazing, not just because she's a powerhouse singer, not just because she's a great actress, but because she understood that in order to change, you had to kind of slightly adapt this character for the big screen. And her performance oftentimes is very subtle and in her facial expressions, right? It just felt so right as a movie musical and not just an adaptation of a musical. And same with, John Chu's direction, I feel like really understood how to make this, as I said, a movie musical and not just a musical that happened to be at the movies. And with all the choreography and the spectacle and the practical sets that they made, I feel like it all really paid off. My one caveat that I will kind of admit, having kind of now also absorbed a lot of other critics' reactions to this, is like, I do feel like the lighting is kind of weird in a couple places. In particular, there's a scene towards the end where I'm like, why is it so dark? And I think I have an explanation as to why, but I still like, so I'm curious to get everybody's takes on kind of the visuals of this later on when we're in spoiler mode. Because I do think that's the one thing that is reasonable to kind of debate whether or not it's working. But yeah, I loved Cynthia Erivo, Ariana Grande. They were both great. Loved the kind of like old Hollywood kind of spectacle of this, but also kind of the themes and the emotional beats I feel like were really highlighted. I didn't actually find the runtime to be a problem. And the things that were added, I think, added to the story in a way that kind of opened it up for me in a way that I didn't even expect, having been really familiar with the songs. So yeah, I know. No, very few notes, maybe one note. Like that's it.
We'll get notes for you. Don't worry about it.
Okay, I know. I figured. All right, so recommendation algorithm doesn't want to assume that every film is for everyone. I had a bunch of questions in here for this. We can kind of pick and choose whichever ones we want to answer, but maybe it makes more sense to talk about why this movie is so popular as opposed to like recommending it to specific subsets of people, or I don't know. I'll throw it out there. What do you want to talk about?
I mean, I think it's popular for the same reason that the musical was popular. It's really relatable, as its breakdown of like social hierarchy is familiar to anyone who's ever been through junior high. And its themes, I think, about like the value of difference and how power is often rooted in altering perceptions is also very resonant today. So I think that's those are all things that people can really find accessible, and so that's why I think that it has power.
I think that's right. I mean, I also think it's a really strong brand, but you've got like this show that's lasted a long time. You have people who have like either seen it a bunch or wanted to see it but haven't been near a place or had the means to get to it, to see it on stage. There's people who've listened to the soundtrack, et cetera, et cetera. So you had that kind of core, and I think that energy and excitement then fanned out, whether sort of whether other people want, some people might have gotten dragged, like, or it might have been like people who, where it's like the whole family's going because two of the kids want to go see it, or the mom and someone else wants to see it, or the dad and someone else. And we don't have to get gender essentialist. But I think it's has the energy, and it's fun that no one is like I've heard very few people be like mad that they went. There's some people who don't like it as much, but I don't think anyone is just sort of like, whoa, what a waste of time. So I think that part's part of it. I will say, I think part of why it's resonating, in addition to all the things that Antonio has said, and maybe I'm just projecting what like I heard was there, I knew would be there because I have seen The Wizard of Oz, an older movie, but it checks out. That I've seen it before. That it's like, oh, the guy who's in charge, who's supposed to be all powerful and everyone looks up to, is a fraud. Got it. I think that like the way in which that story is like seated in here, that part of The Wizard of Oz and the avenues it explores, which I'll try to, I guess I won't spoil, even though like I feel like that's the thing have heard about for 21 years about the movie, only feel more relevant and resonant now in 2024 than they did in 2003 or when the book came out in 1995 or 1996. So I think that it's also sort of speaking to some of the energies and anxieties of the time. And, is that why people are going to see it? I don't know, but I think that might be partially that people are like really attaching to it and loving it as much as they are, even if they're like, I don't care about high school petty infighting, or I don't like musicals, or I don't like the songs don't matter to me, but they might like that part. So I think that's like not a quadrant, but another section of the audience that might get brought into this, and find something there that they enjoy. Yes. The end.
I can corroborate that because just yesterday I was walking down the hall with a student of mine, and she said, hey, I saw the other day you were wearing a Wicked sweater. Like, can we talk about, like, she kind of was like, can we talk about the movie? Because I know that you like it because you were wearing a sweater. And what she said, I'm not exaggerating this at all, is this is the movie that we need right now. And she's like, it's been a tough month. The world is in a tough place. And this movie felt so good. And I was like taking my notes. I'm like, okay, Oscar notes, like, about like, yes, Oscar narrative check. So yeah, I think, and she, no one put it quite in that way, like really like as obviously as and explicitly as that. But I think everyone I've talked to who's really liked this movie, their reaction is just as effusive and just as like, it was so amazing, it was so great. And I think, first of all, it's really exciting to have a movie that's doing that to everyone, or most people, right? Like, and have it really kind of break through our cinephile bubble. So, yeah.
I just actually want to play the card PT refused to play. So the night I went to see a different blockbuster movie coming soon to this podcast feed, this is a tragic story. My Panera Bread was full. So I had to take my half soup, half sandwich out into the hallway of the mall. And I was seated kind of near the doors that people enter to go down to the AMC. And I'm, enjoying my soup and half sandwich and watching as mothers come in carrying 2 or 3 daughters and like look, you never know, but it looks like grandmas with daughters with granddaughters headed into this movie. And this would have been the like 7:00 show ish on that opening Thursday. And I was like, oh, this is a phenomenon. This is like Barbie. And that's a credit to the marketing executives. I mean, every AMC I've been to has had a balloon arch out for Instagram photo ops ready to go for this movie. And like, that stuff matters. And I think it's yet again, Hollywood is like, oh, right, women have money too. Oh, that's right. It's Bridesmaids all over again. Like, wow, look at that. And like, that matters. Like, the boys get so much. We got Gladiator the same night, right? And so it really, to me, is special. And I think that is what's going to, I think the numbers look like this is sustaining. I had said on a previous podcast that like Rent opened really big, but then nobody went the second week because all the fans went through. And I think this is sustaining because it's become that level of event. The teenage girl who was not excited to sit next to me really just wanted to be on Instagram the whole time, but had to be at Wicked to have that kind of social cachet to be able to say, I saw Wicked, by which I mean I swore at a middle-aged man and then checked my Instagram while Wicked played in the background. But I do think all of that matters, and that is, taps into what you're both saying about power right now. I think, well, let me tell you, Jen, that women aren't in a good place in this country right now. They're not feeling
Thanks, Greg.
beloved. They're feeling kind of wicked. So, yeah,
Jen,
I'll
Greg
fill
talk.
you in later. Shush. I'll fill it in later. But that is a good reason to go see it because it is empowering, right? If you are feeling unempowered, no matter what your gender is, I think it's a good film to get your spirits up, or to just say, let's burn it all down. Just smash windows and burn it all down.
Yeah, it is kind of the perfect cocktail of fury and hope, right? In a way that I think is really speaking to people. Yeah, and also to bring it back to the actual to the way the film was made, I do feel like there's something about the pacing. Say what you will about the long runtime, but I think there's something about the pacing that is distinctly a buildup, right? Like the movie shifts into another gear at the end in a way that I think is very effective and has people leaving the theater feeling a certain way. So I guess it sounds like we're saying that you don't need to necessarily be a big musical person or even a big Wicked the musical person to get something out of this.
Go on the big screen though, because again, this is not going to be as good at home, and that seems to be, it's like a Marvel movie, it's like a Dune movie. It's like you got to see it big, and especially with the really loud sound system, absolutely cranked. I love when the seat is shaking, not because there's like a transformer blowing up, but because somebody's belting out a high note.
Right. Yeah, I saw an IMAX. I actually even have special IMAX pin. Pin set that I got.
The
Yeah,
listeners will love it.
They're really sorry. I'll crinkle the. There we go. You can hear it. Can you hear it? Can you hear the sound of merch? Yeah, it's
like all
basically
good pins in a crinkle.
Okay, I'll describe it. It's one pin, and now we've spent too long on this. One pin says IMAX, but it's in the Wicked font, and the other one is the logo of Shiz University. It's the like swirly S. So yeah, I mean they're really all over the merch situation, and I think the marketing for this film has been genius because it is basically like duped people who don't even know what it is to go see it, like. Because it's such a part of, like, you can't go to Target or, like, and you can't go on the internet without getting an ad for, like, oh, the Wicked fill in the blank. And I think that it's really paying off in a big way. I even was listening to The Town, and Matt Bellany made a comment about the marketing. I think his sometimes co-host Lucas Shaw was like, like, I'm here for it. He's like, I can tolerate one movie that's marketed constantly. Like, and everyone's getting in on the capitalism of it. He's like, I can get behind it. Like, usually they're pretty cynical about that sort of thing.
I can't confirm this because I haven't asked any of them, but I would say I am seeing a lot of the Wicked cosmetics appearing in my classroom, like young female students who are suddenly with like pink blush and eyeliner. I'm like, okay, we've got a Glinda over here. We've got an Elphaba over here. Just keep them on opposite sides of the classroom and it's all good. Until the end where they can come together. I get it. I know.
All right, no spoilers. No spoilers. Jeez.
The end or the middle, Greg? Sorry.
Wow.
People always ask that about my classes.
So I think the last thing before we go into spoiler mode is how should we prepare people for the part 1 factor? Or like, I guess, do you know any people who were surprised that it was part 1 and not the whole musical?
I don't know anyone who went to see it, but I've talked to people and sort of, I keep forgetting it's not called Wicked Part 1, like officially in the title. And I've said, yeah, Wicked Part 1. And they're like, what now? And they are disappointed in hearing that. But, you know, I haven't heard reports necessarily of people like leaving the theater being like, where's this song and that song? Like, what are we doing? But I'm sure that's possible. It has the Dune issue of being marketed as Wicked, and then the title card comes up and it says Wicked Part 1, and it's like,
they even delayed
the runtime, and you're like, wait a minute,
right? Like I couldn't believe that it said Wicked, and then it's like afterthought, almost like an asterisk, like part 1 came up just a beat after. So and since I complained about the runtime, everybody I've heard talk about this says they didn't care about the runtime either. Like I haven't heard any dissatisfied customers. Everybody says good. And what's funny for me is I heard the one song I know. So are there songs in part 2? I don't know. We'll have to see in a year to find out.
As someone who's never seen it and doesn't know, I've heard very conflicting things about how much individual people talking about it like part 2. I have heard some people say all the good songs are in this movie and there's only one good song next time. And other people say the best songs of the musical are coming in the next movie. And, you know, get ready. So
let's hear Jen and Antonio's votes on that question, and then we can go to spoilers.
I think that's a smart move.
I think one good song, and I'm in the one good song left in part 2 camp.
Yeah, I would say in terms of just the songs, we've peaked because Defying Gravity is the best song in the whole show. I don't think that's a controversial take at all. But I really like where the story goes. Like the story gets much darker in the second act of the musical. So I feel like we might have a New Hope Empire Strikes Back situation kind of. You know what I mean? Like it's I think the tone of it is going to appeal to a lot of people. And could very well turn off others who were like, this was such a happy time. But yeah, I don't want to say too much more because then we're getting into spoilers for a movie no one's seen. But yeah,
spoilers for, is it next year confirmed? Sorry for not even knowing that. So it's 1 year.
The joke is that we have an intermission. It's just a year long. That's what I've heard. So yeah, it's exactly same week, Thanksgiving week next year. The one anecdote I have to share about this is I have a friend. So for me, when I saw the Wicked Part 1, I was like relieved because I'm like, okay, at least they're getting that out of the way now. So it won't be like Across the Spider-Verse where people get to the end of the movie and they're like, wait a minute, what? So I was happy about that. But then I talked to a friend who said that they interpreted that as we were going to get an intermission just like in the musical, and then another title card would come up and say part 2. And so when he realized that we were stopping before we got to part 2, he said he wasn't mad about it, but he was very confused because he was like, wait a minute, I thought this was part 1 and where's part 2? Then I had to explain to him, no, there's a whole other movie that's part 2.
And I think the issue, which is maybe to tease this pivot to spoiler mode, is there are things I don't know if we need in this movie that feel like they're kind of in to pad it out to make it worth having this be split into 2. I will admit to having preloaded like Charles Foster Kane's paper on election night 2 letterbox reviews before I went to see it. One for if I liked it and one for if I didn't. And the one if I hadn't liked it would have been Hobbit: The Unexpected Journey, but it's only them singing around the dinner table. But because it does sort of have that Hobbit vibe of like we've got other stuff from the book we can put in. And it's like, oh, okay. Do you need that for the story? No, but we have it. Like, what do you want us to do with it? We're just not use it? It's like, maybe there's a reason it wasn't used before. So we can talk about some of that. But I think that if I had gone in with that mindset of like, oh, well, that's just saying here at part 1, and then an hour plus in, we'll get Wicked part 2 after a little break. That'll be fine. And then I got to it actually an hour and a half in, and I was like, what are we doing? Why are we spending so much time on some of this stuff? But I think we're going to disagree on how perfect a construction the movie is. But we can do that in spoiler mode.
Yeah, I was going to say, I disagree with that. I like what they added and kind of lengthened, but I can't really explain why without spoiling. So there's our cue. If you have not seen Wicked, turn back now. Everyone's going to go see it, so you might as well also, and come back and rejoin us for the rest of the conversation. It's the most motion I've seen any of you do. I'm just gonna be honest. We're movie people. We're not supposed to dance. But this is a musical, so I suppose we can make exceptions. Okay, so I guess let's start with PT's point. What do we think about? Okay, so I guess first we should establish what parts of this are not in the musical. So maybe Antonia and I could do that, and then we can open up the discussion for whether or not the additions or lengthening of it was warranted. So my understanding is that the primary things that they added are the Professor Dilliman, and for those of you who don't know, that's the goat. The sort of like talking animals being silenced subplot is what we spend a lot more time with. So my understanding is that the musical does not have this, in particular the scene where there's a bunch of animals sort of covertly meeting with each other. That is not in the show. Is that, can you confirm that, Antonio?
A long time since I've seen this, but I don't recall that, and the logistics of making that work also, as PT pointed out, would have been very difficult.
True. Yes. Talking animals on Broadway, not easy.
The Lion King would disagree.
That's true.
But I will just say that I appreciate that this movie honoring the legacy of Troy Barnes by having a literal scapegoat. That was what a great move.
But
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because the animal stuff felt the most added. Like, that makes sense. What you're saying, that felt the most okay, we need this. But it also tied into the theme of the movie that I liked the most. And I was like, that's the sort of, we needed this movie now. It's a movie for our time. That component that might be like part of the wider narrative around it, in a way that wasn't exactly what, how I was thinking things were going to play out. Like, I guess I had assumed, to me, and again, I'm saying things only knowing this movie. I don't know what happens in the others, so maybe I'll try to not look at Jen and Antonio to have their reactions give away obvious occurrences that happen later. But I was like, oh, I think that the Michelle Yeoh's character and the wizard are clearly scouting and I now this is so terrible. I don't know how to pronounce her name. Elphaba, right? Not Elphaba, which is how I wanted to say it every time I read it.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, Jen. But they're scouting Elphaba. I'm assuming Oz is her dad. And that's
100% Jeff Goldblum's voice.
Yeah. Okay. And also it looked like
go listen to it without watching the scene, and it
looked like 80s, somewhere between The Fly and Jurassic Park, Jeff Goldblum, CGI profile, when you could see him in the shadows from the back and the side. Anyway, that they were doing it to be oh, this will be our enemy. I didn't know there'd be another step in between of they have these scapegoats, that some of them are literally goats, who are these animals, and she's there to try to save them. I just thought it was going to be, the wizards thing ain't working anymore. We got to come up with an enemy. Let's get a green kid somewhere and then make sure that she develops at least the illusion of powers, and we'll go from there. So I like that it made it more complicated. I like that it became a story of standing up for someone else and not just defending yourself. But it also kind of like those are the parts where I was like, okay, like any discussion of it never like felt long. It didn't feel long overall, but it didn't like, I never thought about like, why are we still doing this? Because there were those parts and a couple of other little sequences where I was like, wow, this is still happening. And it was, no offense to the animals, but it was the animals. Because it's like, well, that doesn't work out for them. So what are we doing here?
The big confrontation scene with the goat and actually, I guess it's the first classroom scene with the goat professor. Sorry for not remembering his specific name, Dr. Bah. And so, but I actually thought those were Ariana Grande's worst scenes because they felt out of character for the Glinda we'd established, right? We kind of had like kind of spoiled brat Glinda, and then she started on her journey towards redemption. And then we got this scene in the middle where she's like correcting how he says her name, and like she's like, every other professor can get it right, which like I'm like, oh, I've heard that voice and that tone in a classroom many a time. But it felt like I don't think that's where she is anymore, and like she should know that a goat doesn't have lips and can't form that, right? Like it was such a weird discordant moment in the plot I was interested in that it also felt superfluous. And I guess what I understand is that is actually a prominent plot in the books, so it's not like it's been invented for this, is what I understand.
Yeah, I mean, the general plot line is a part of the show. It's just that it passes by much more quickly. And again, it's been a while, but I think it's just Dr. Dillamond mostly. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like we see a bunch of other animals. And I think, again, if you have seen the musical like 1,000 times, please tell us. Like, please step in and help us. But like a lot of the details about the lore behind, like, well, back in the day, Oz used to be different, like that kind of thing. And the mural that has the wizard when it peels away and it shows a series of humanoid animals there instead. Like, I think a lot of that is being added in that we don't really get in the show. And for me, it all works for two reasons. One is PT sort of alluded to this, where I think it really shores up a lot of the themes that were definitely in the original show, but the political allegory and the idea of like this being an anti-fascist story, and kind of like if you go read my written review of Wicked on thelongtake.substack.com, there's an extensive
what a great
explanation
website.
As to thank you, Greg. There's an extensive explanation as to like how the post-colonial theory of the other kind of like can be identified in this storyline, and how that helps us understand kind of Elphaba's character and her purpose, and kind of in relation to the wizard and to this animal suppression or oppression plotline. So there's that. I think it really does enhance the themes in that way, in a nice way. And then secondly, for me, I know Greg in his short take said that he thought the fantasy world aspect of this was kind of silly. Says the person who's a fan of Star Wars that has a musical genre named Jizz.
No, that's been retconned. Nice try. Saying. It's called Jats. You had to get filthy. This is a family podcast about a family movie, and you come in here with your jizz just all over the place.
I believe in Sebastian Shaw. I believe in a 3-piece Mark Rebo band, and I believe in jizz whaling. And you can't take that away from me, Greg.
No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to start this.
And pause for the edit point, and all right, continue.
But okay, so yeah, Greg. I know Greg's mentioned that the sort of fantasy elements here are silly, but to me, it took what I always thought of as a musical about these characters and really cracked it open to become something more like Harry Potter, where it was like there's this whole like I was like, I want to learn more about like where's the Grimmery from, and what is its deal, and like where did these animals come from? Like it really made me interested in this as a fantasy franchise in a way that I never would have associated with just the show before. So I don't know. For me, it worked.
And since we're in the section where we're ostensibly asking about connections to other source material, do you have a sense if like the Grimmery and all that is from the books? Because as I recall, I remember seeing the like set of Oz books, but I have no idea what's in them other than the Wizard of Oz. So this is my ignorance.
Yeah, I'm no help with this either. I have not read.
But isn't that really interesting that we all, I think, would say Wizard of Oz is beloved? It was literally the first VHS my family owned when VHS tapes cost like $80, and we wore it out. Literally, like it eventually snapped. And yet I don't remember my sister who loved it or me ever kind of cracking open the books to see. It's just interesting more in the history of this franchise that that's not something that's been the root. As we see these franchises get sucked up, it seems like that's the way you'd go, is to go find those books. And it seems like we're doing something very different here, which I just think is interesting.
I think the issue, and this, maybe it can bring it back to the, something about Wicked as a, from the book that was written through the musical, now through the movie of the musical, is that like, and maybe it's because I wasn't franchise pilled yet because I was a young child, but like I watched The Wizard of Oz, and I'm just like, I don't need more of this. Like, this was a weird world that this girl created in her head when she got knocked out. And it feels like Return to Oz and the very unfortunate Sam Raimi, James Franco vehicle, Oz the Great and Powerful, is sort of like, but what about like more about this world? And it's like, no, because it's the three farmhands and the like mean like school, like what are we doing? Like, it's just this girl's fantasy. Is this some like cinematic or literary Tommy Westphal universe of like, and this whole world like spreads out from her one imagination during this one little like nap that she had? Or is it supposed to be that she really transported to another world? I respect that there were a bunch of books written back in the day and that there's other things here, but I think this movie does a good job, and I'm assuming the book and the musical as well, because of recontextualizing the characters and being sort of a prequel, and also making the adjustment that it does and being one of the first that did that. Shout out again, Jen's review at thelongtake.substack.com to bring in John Gardner's Grendel, which I think is the one that precedes this in a literary sense, but. Yeah, that like, okay, cool. Like this is great. But beyond that, beyond sort of hearing about, what's the story before the Wizard of Oz? If we think about these characters, the two witch characters this way, I don't know if I need to know more about what happens in Oz, because I don't think of Oz as a place that actually exists. I think of it as this amazing Technicolor fantasy that a girl who lives in a sepia toned world gets to have when she's in a moment of stress and injury, I guess, when she's in concussion protocols, and then comes out from the blue tent. She's just sort of like, and you were there.
So I did find my slapdash internet search. I did find the Grimmery is not from L. Frank Baum's original book, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, but it is from Gregory Maguire's 1995 novel Wicked. Which, to be fair, maybe we should have said this in the recommendation algorithm. If you don't know, those are not kid-appropriate books. I haven't read them, but I know enough about them now that I can say do not, because I think a lot of people are assuming, Wicked is kid friendly, as the movie is pretty kid friendly. I think, like, other than the long runtime, I would consider taking my kids, but like I don't know if they can sit through 2 hours and 40 minutes, but I think they would like it, and I think they if other than just the sitting still part, but I have heard lots of people being like, don't assume this is like Harry Potter and make your kids read the books. They have a lot of explicit material. So
sorry, I'm pausing to order one. I mean, this would predate the like 50 Shades moment, but it's like that kind of explicit material, or Jen is nodding, podcast listeners, and turning 3 shades of red as she does so. Interesting.
Only 47 more to go.
Okay, I think we actually have we've not only stepped in it, but we've stepped in rhetorical situations. So I'm going to play the music and make it official.
Reminds me of the hallowed halls of Shiz University.
So all four of our regular co-hosts are writing professors. We like to have this section of the episode dedicated to making connections to our experience as scholars and teachers. So we already started talking about what I had planned for this section, and this idea of not only the remixing of stories, and Greg was making fun of the fact that it has such a strange and complicated chain of adaptation that's leading us to this movie. So I think I'll kick us off by responding to what PT was saying. And I feel like, sure, I can definitely see the argument for like, there was nothing wrong with The Wizard of Oz. Like, why are we messing with The Wizard of Oz? But I do really like the idea of the general idea of the presumed truth of something being re-examined, and the idea that the narrative that we know from The Wizard of Oz could have been propaganda circulated in Oz, that is, and that Wicked is sort of providing the untold truth of it. Like, as a general concept, I really love The Wizard of Oz, and so I'm equally protective and fond of the original story, but I think you can still keep that as it is and still enjoy this other story that's trying to kind of riff off The Wizard of Oz, if that makes sense, because of the kind of political allegory that it creates.
I agree. I think that, like, look, the Percival Everett, a professor at USC, just won the National Book Award for James, which is a retelling of Huck Finn from another perspective. And I think that we don't question those experiments in the literary form, because it's a literary form, right? I think that we it's a little bit easier to pierce at like the material here, because we're dealing with movies and we're dealing with a musical, and there's a spottier history of those being adapted in like sophisticated ways. But I'm not the biggest Wicked musical fan, but I still really respected this movie and enjoyed it more than I thought. I took my kids; they had a really good time with it. And I'll be honest, I've never seen The Wizard of Oz, so I don't have any. I don't have any. I know, bad. But but so anyway, I think that there's room for it if you do it well, right? I mean, I think that if the adaptation or the take on something is like Battlestar Galactica, PT and I love this, right? But the reimagining of that happened, I think that original material, I don't think that necessarily people were preparing for like a second take on that, but like I think that the new take on that was a worthwhile experiment. And so this too, I think, is, I mean, again, I because I don't know the source material, I have, there's no, sort of sacred space for The Wizard of Oz, but I'm glad that this exists. I've seen it in two different forms. What do you all think?
But Antonio, does the wizard have a plan? That's the big question. Jen, I mean, a long take review bonus episode where we have to watch The Wizard of Oz and come and talk about it, and
yeah, we should have done it last week. It sounds like
I had to get a new TV to replace my broken old one. So, Greg, get on a plane, West Coast Wizard of Oz viewing party at my place, and we can record an episode afterwards.
I actually just showed The Wizard of Oz to my kids over, it wasn't quite Thanksgiving break yet, but it was pretty recently. And they are usually, I'm very crestfallen most of the time that they are pretty allergic to movies. They think movies are scary and too long. And, sometimes they're not wrong. But I thought that I was trying to think of a movie that wouldn't that they would sit through. And they 100% did. And they loved it. And they said, Mom, this was a fun movie. We liked this movie. And I was just like, what? And I haven't yet figured out what to follow that up with. But
Singing in the Rain. Do it. It's what all the cool kids love.
But
Absolutely.
they I think they mostly liked the fantasy elements of it, though. Like, they liked that there's a lion and a scarecrow, and and they were scared of the flying monkeys, but I guess we can't turn this into a Wizard of Oz episode, so I'll stop talking. But
well, since Greg just made a quick reference to Singing in the Rain, when we get around to when we have more like nitpicks to make with this movie, which I don't want to focus on because I liked it, but I actually was thinking of Singing in the Rain in contrast to one of the things that I thought was a problem with this movie was like the attempts to make it big and sweeping and make it like, look at all these people, look at all these things that are going on, sometimes undermined the excellent choreography and performances in dancing and musical sequences. And I was thinking about how Singing in the Rain had so many moments where it was like, plant the camera here, let them dance for like 3 minutes and just follow them around and see where it goes. And we had these moments where I felt like we could do maybe not 3 minutes, but at least for like 30 seconds, 30, 40 seconds, and get a whole sequence. And instead it was like, no, we have to see what's happening in this corner of the library and that corner of the library. It was most of the library scene where I was thinking about this, where I was like, this is fantastic. All these sets and all this stuff that's going on. And it's like, we can't actually focus on any of it. Like, I'm surprised at how much praise the direction is getting, when I think that actually the direction is one of the things that's maybe holding it back from being better, which I think is not a popular take amongst most people.
I think related to that, beyond the choreography and the way that and whatever, like kind of beginning of like a lot of the things, right? I think that so the plot was extended. Like, you know, you open up the plot line and add additional characters, but also songs were longer, I think, right? And I think sometimes to the detriment of the song. And like, I think Popular and Defying Gravity are two really excellent songs. I might come around to The Wizard and I a little bit, but really The Wizard and I just like part of The Wizard and I. But Dancing Through Life felt like a lifetime. It was quite long. And I do not, that is not the way that it plays on stage. And I don't think that it actually was benefited from the extended take. The long take.
So, yeah, I know. Like, how hypocritical are we being? We're called the long
I know.
So the explanation that I can come up with for this is that if you watch the Broadway show, a lot of things can happen simultaneously on stage that they have to do linearly in the movie. So it's like, Bach asking out Nessa is like, they have just like a spotlight to the other side of the stage quickly, right? And then they can go back to the library. Like, whereas in the movie, the cuts wouldn't make sense if you did that. I think that quickly. So not to make excuses for it, but I think that's why the thing I really liked about Dancing Through Life is the spinning bookcase really reminded me of, there's a Fred Astaire dance in the spinning wheel. Maybe I'll try to find a video of it on YouTube and put it in the show notes. That is so iconic that I just immediately got excited when I saw the spinning bookshelf. I was just like, yes, are we gonna do is Jonathan Bailey? And I'm like, he's doing it. I could have used, to PT's point, I could have used more. Like, we didn't need to cut away from the spinning bookcase as often. I would have liked to have stayed there for a little bit, but it still made me happy. It was great.
That was my feeling, because it looked all practical and like really cool, but it was hard to like wrap your head around. Like, I found myself, I think the camera spun just a little, so I'm like, I actually want a still camera way at the end of this, just shooting down it and watching these performers cook. And so I agree with PT's larger point. I'm still not quite over Antonio joining the Long Take Review book club by mentioning James. So that's a great book, and people should read that book, because but I do, just to get back to the original question, maybe too long ago now to matter, but I do think this is a really fun like task, and none of my criticisms are about the idea of retelling a story and making you question your assumptions and tell it from the opposite side. I think that's like one of the most fantastic things, that literature and movies can do, and it kind of takes that baseline empathy generator and puts it like back in you in a way that's like, oh, like this is actually testing me and what I thought before. So I thought that part was kind of completely successful. The part I didn't like is that so much of it felt like it was in the post Harry Potter moment. You mentioned that being like a selling point in some ways, but I'm like, I think you could have done something more original here instead of kind of fitting it into that mold. So that's more of what I had a problem with this idea of a retelling. And part of that is like, Jen already called me out for being a Star Wars fan. How dare you, ma'am? But the idea that like a prequel is terrible when it just shines a light over and over again on how it's a prequel. And those are the moments I just totally grated on me. When they're in the wizard's office, for lack of a better word, and they're like, I installed these lights to test what color the brick road will be. And Galinda's like, what about yellow? And I was like, oh my God, like, is this how I'm spending my life? It's now like 12:30 at night, and this is what I'm seeing. And pink? No, yellow. Oh, and then they
Glinda, who are
use
your
the
people?
song. That was just to me like, no, like we can't do that stuff. Because and again, I want to be very clear, like it's because there's so much good original stuff here. I'm like, let's stop doing that. Like that's kind of lowest common denominator, the prequel bait, and I just really don't like it. So
to save Jen from having to be defended again, I will slightly, which is that I was thinking about this, of course, as the kind of nerd I am. I was thinking about this as, so the book came out a few years before The Phantom Menace, but the musical debuted right between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. So like, I actually remember hearing when it premiered and there were reviews of the Broadway version about how it's like, well, this is a good prequel. Whereas the Star Wars movies have been failures. Like we hate the prequels. And which, whatever, time's been good and changed that. But popularly, nod, wink, wink. It was thought of that the prequels, Star Wars prequels, were bad. And it was interesting to see the ways in which I was like, oh yeah, like in the same sense that we were like, people were like, great, we get to see young Anakin Skywalker just freaking murder children. This is going to be amazing. He's going to hunt down Jedi for a movie and a half. He's just going to be this like assassin. And then it was like, no, he's a little kid and he likes to race cars. And people complained about that. But, there's a similar sort of recontextualizing in terms of trying to be like, let's tell the earlier story and add more to it. Maybe not with the same intent of let's really undermine a classic villain and just not undermine in a bad way, but change your perspective and see like, are we sure that we really know what we think that we know? Which is, I think what makes this movie or this story, this approach to talking about these two characters ultimately so successful. And I want to, I guess, go rewind back a little bit to say, I didn't mean when I was talking about how I don't need more Oz than the Wizard of Oz, I didn't mean that to say this was a bad idea or that this was done poorly. I think this is, I get it. I get why people have glommed onto it so much. That was more in response to, it's weird that we never got more Wizard of Oz movies. There weren't like, because it's not like there weren't sequels. If you go back, they were churning out Thin Man movies. There were, Hope and Crosby Road movies. Like they would sequelize things as much as possible if they thought they could print the money for it. But I think that with The Wizard of Oz, there wasn't more story there until, I mean, again, there were a couple of tries, but I think that when they found this, when someone took this approach, that unlocked it into like, oh, that's interesting. In terms of the Harry Potterification, I could see that in the movie in that sort of just like, don't you love magic universities? Like, isn't that fun? But I did sort of assume that was all there in the book, maybe extended out and added in to catch on to that. But I was assuming that was there already. I didn't hold it against the book that it also, or the story that it also had a magic university. But I did hear, when hearing about what were the things that were added in, some of the songs were a little bit longer, adding in more of the animals. That Yellow Brick Road scene was one of the things they added, which I kind of liked only because like, just let Jeff Goldblum do his shtick. And it's like, I'm always charmed. I'm always happy. And he was like prime Goldblum shtick doing that. And be like, maybe I could try these lights. Like that was great. Like I liked all of that. But I also agree that there wasn't like a look at all this iconography. Like it's all coming into place, which is, I think would have been a little bit more impactful, certainly in 1995, 96. But like by now it's just like we've seen enough prequels and enough things where like we kind of get it, and that feels like maybe they didn't need that. But I don't know. I didn't make $260 million, so what do I know?
I just want to say one other thing back to the directing point. There were Ariana Grande is very good in this, and then she's just acting and doing a great job. And then there were moments where the camera would catch on her in the group choreography, and you're like, oh, she is a pro, right? Like she has complete control of her body and can lock and do those moves. I was like, I think it is actually the library where the prince kind of moves his hips and then she does it 10 times better than him. You're like, oh, that's somebody who's a trained dancer. And so I don't know. It doesn't sound like she's going to be get to cook in the sequel, but I was like, I would love to see a full on moment of Ariana Grande getting to show this is what an actual pop star can do in this. Cause the one that's gone kind of TikTok viral of walking down the hall with the books. Yeah, it's good. But I was like, I think she could really do a lot more than the directing shows off of her. So that just agrees with PT's point.
The only thing I'll add about the Yellow Brick Road scene is that I mostly liked it as this weird perversion of Walt Disney. I don't know if anyone else picked up on that, but just the production design in those scenes feels like if you ever watched the old Sunday night Disney, I don't remember what it's called now, the Magical World of Walt Disney or something like that. And he does the intros with his little miniature model of something, or it's I think it's just Disney World, right? And so the idea that the wizard is a creepy version of Walt Disney, I just found to be very unsettling. But to me, he was clear. But and so to that is why I think that the Yellow Brick, I agree, as kind of like a prequel moment, it's kind of cringy, but as a moment of developing the wizard's character, I think it works well.
What if Walt Disney were an over-controlling fascist? Interesting.
I didn't say that. I did not say that. All right. I think. Are we ready for Oscar Watch?
Do we have any
Oh yeah, go for it.
One thing that I want to say, because I feel like we've talked about a lot of the ways in which the adaptation, some of the things that we didn't like about the adaptation to film, but there's one moment in particular that I thought worked better on film, and that was the moment at the dance, and you had where a character says, I think Fiero says, she doesn't care what anyone thinks, and then Glinda says, of course she does, she just pretends not to, and you get this moment. This is a triumph of directing and a triumph of acting, and also the ability to do a close-up and to see Elphaba's face. Wicked people will always feel like a triumph at defying gravity, because that's just a great song, and you have to be dead inside to feel something for that. But I think that moment works especially well because you have this moment earlier in the film where her vulnerability is so clear, and where the connection with Glinda is rooted in this very human. I feel your pain, and I think it's really hard sometimes to relate to people and to connect with them when we feel pain, right? And or when they feel like, so different from us that it's not possible to draw any comparisons. So I thought that moment when Glinda wipes a tear from Elphaba's eye, I found just incredibly touching. And I thought, this, I don't remember having this visceral feeling when I was watching this in the musical. So I feel like this is actually an improvement over the source material.
The thing I was going to say, just a couple, do we want to do any quick, favorite songs?
Favorites?
Favorite, non 2 stars performances? Do we want to do any of that? Do we have any not superlatives? We don't have a ton of categories. And I say that because I personally want to shout out Bowen Yang, who I just thought was always lurking. And every time the camera found him or every time he had a line, just like nailed it. It was great. It was just like, yep, he's that kind of like minion or sort of lackey for who he thinks is the like mean girl, popular girl, and like changing on a dime when necessary. And yeah, I mean, kind of looking like maybe like a 38-year-old student, but that's okay. We don't know when people go to Shiz University in their lives. They don't need to look like high school or college age kids. But there's so many great big performances that are central to this. But I really liked what he was doing and thought he did a great job. That's the only performance people liked. Okay.
I mean, I liked all of it, so that's my problem. I'm just like trying to think. I'm like, oh, what do I want to give a shout out to? There's so many things about this that I liked.
Can I tee you up, Jen? One of the big critiques that I've seen is people don't like Michelle Yeoh because she's not like a singer, and she's like, they were like, well, this could have gone to like a real Broadway type performer, right. And instead she kind of talk sings her songs. But I know your feelings about Michelle Yeoh. So Jen, what did you think about Michelle Yeoh in particular in this movie?
Yeah, it's painfully obvious that she's not a singer. And in every interview I've seen of her, she very clearly is trying to get in front of that and be like, look, when John Chu called me and was like, do you want to play this part? My response was like, no, I don't sing. And he convinced me to do it. Right. So clearly, and I think that's the biggest critique is like, well, she sticks out because everyone else is such a great singer. Or is clearly trained musically, that her kind of talk singing sticks out a little bit. But I really liked her performance from an acting standpoint. I thought she did really well to sort of seem charismatic and kind of appealing at the beginning, right? And then, when her, in particular, towards the end, when she snaps into full villain mode, it's chilling for me. I just think because it looks like she's having a ton of fun being a villain, and so I think we're actually going to see a lot more flexes from her in part 2, because now that she's kind of unveiled herself as a full villain, I think she's going to have a lot more room to play. So I'm really looking forward to that. But yeah, I feel bad because it's like she literally won her Academy Award while they were filming this movie. There's a really endearing clip on the internet, if you can find it, that shows her carrying her Oscar onto the set, and everyone's clapping and cheering for her. And she's got her Madame Morrible wig with the like little swirly top while she's holding her Oscar. It's really funny. And apparently she like passed it around, like she let everyone like take a look at it and stuff like that. So they had a cake for her. Yeah, it seemed like a great time. But yeah, so I would say people are being a little harsh on her purely because of the vocal performance. And she sounds fine. It's just because she's not like belting things like that, I think is the prop. People are like, they should cast somebody else. But I do think that this movie in general is a very good case study in, no, really, you don't it's not a trade-off for your leads to be either actors or singers. Like, you can have both, because I do think Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande in particular are really bringing it in terms of all aspects of their performance. Like, it's not like they're stronger in one area than another. It's like they're the whole package. And so, and I'd say that that's true of Jonathan Bailey too. I mean, that Fiyero can be a pretty shallow role just by nature of the character. But I think showing his kind of like, especially the scene in the forest with Elphaba, I feel like shows a lot of subtle range, because you can clearly see, not to quote the movie, I guess, but like something has changed with him, right? Like that, how much impact that scene has on the development of his character. So I don't know. I thought good stuff all around. I don't know. Greg, did you have a shout out?
Not really. I praised Ariana Grande's dancing. I will say I couldn't hear her delivering lines without thinking of Kristen Chenoweth. So I don't know if we want to go to awards watch, but I'm much more in the Cynthia Erivo camp. And I think hit me with that music, Jen.
All right, let's go into Oscars watch, because I think we do have a lot to talk about. We didn't leave ourselves enough time. So I do think that the big debate right now is how much of a Best Picture contender is this. There were a slew of articles that came out in a lot of the trades that had some variation on can Wicked actually win Best Picture? Because I think people before the movie came out and made such a splash, no one had it on their Best Picture list, and now almost everybody has it on their Best Picture list, and some people are actually saying it could win. So, like, what do we think? Are people getting too overexcited because of the popularity of the movie? What do we think?
I want to be clear. On our episode, Greg asked, "What do you think is the Best Picture frontrunner?" And I said,
Oh, that's true.
That's
You
right.
did. It's correct.
You did. You made fun of all of us.
"Well, I didn't make fun of you. I think you made fun of me." So I think I'm not sure. I think it's a front runner. I don't know if it's the front runner, but I think it's possible.
No, I think it definitely has the momentum that now it is a true contender. And honestly, like, name another movie that has more momentum right now in terms of both the critical response and sort of the popular zeitgeist.
You can't, and the problem is it's December, and the awards are voted on in January and February. So, like, that's potentially an issue when it gets to it actually winning. But I agree that it has momentum right now. It also has, that sort of. I never recall. I can't recall. I can't say never, but right now I cannot recall if there ever was like real kind of drum beats for just like, shouldn't we give like Top Gun Maverick like Best Picture? I remember people were just like, shouldn't we at least nominate Avengers Endgame or Spider-Man No Way Home? And the argument was like, wouldn't it be great to give it to a movie that was super popular? And like last year, Oppenheimer made a lot of money. It made like $400-500 million domestically, and more worldwide. Maybe that's the worldwide gross, I forget, but it made a lot of money. And so if when you look at this in comparison to Sing Sing or Anora or Conclave, like those are movies that are doing their thing, but like how many people are actually going to have seen that? Whereas like this is like you saw Wicked, right? Come look at the Oscars and maybe it'll win a bunch of awards. So, I could see some momentum continuing from people who are just like, well, we always disappoint those folks, when it's not a James Cameron movie. Because even Oppenheimer was like not that movie compared to Barbie. And so it's like, what do we like, do we actually go ahead and do this? Like, is this, maybe it has like that factor will be in favor of it. That said, I think that what Antonio said is right. It's like firmly in the space as a contender now, whereas before it was like, yeah, there's like 4 movies that come in at the bottom. It'll be one of those. Whereas now it feels like it's in the top 5. And like, if we were back to a 5 picture, best picture grouping, it probably would still make it in. Will it carry this momentum all the way through? Will people like, with space and time from this initial burst of excitement, will everyone be like, yeah, man, that movie was still so incredible, and like that needs to get the award? Or will some of the luster fade away, which seems impossible given how bright it is in outside every building in the universe of Wicked. But I think that there's a possibility it stays, but I think right now it's premature to be like, yep, Juggernaut, it's locked in, like ride it all the way. That said, it would be great if Antonio had been right and he gets to say he called it back in whatever that was, October or no.
It'd be a big I told you so.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think that if you start adding up the categories that this would get nominated in, it's hard to deny, honestly, because I think all the crafts, right?
All the crafts.
All the crafts? I don't know.
It should not get cinematography. I'm just going to put that out there.
Okay, so maybe not that, but that's too controversial, I guess, because some people really hate the cinematography in this. But at the very least, a win in costume, probably a pretty good contender in production design. I would assume. Well, actually, I don't know if score would count if it would be contending in score anyway, or if it would qualify. But and then initially, people were only saying Ariana Grande could get in, but now I'm hearing a lot of Cynthia Erivo momentum, so that could be happening. I mean, Best Actress this year is crazy, but I think she easily jumps ahead of Demi Moore for The Substance and Nicole Kidman for Baby Girl, just because I think Wicked is going to be, as a movie, is going to be a lot more accepted by the Academy wholesale than those movies. So I don't know.
And if they keep this off Peacock and it goes through the Christmas season and gets those sing-along screenings, I think it's only going to gain. I was just checking because just to give my full props to Antonio, he called it when we were like, is there going to be a blockbuster lane here in the Best Pictures? Like, this is absolutely it. It's already up to number 6 on the domestic box office for the year. And it's going to have trouble catching 1 and 2, but I would my guess would be it settles in number 3 behind Inside Out 2 and Deadpool and Wolverine. So that's pretty great. And so the happiest people are going to be the ABC executives, right? I mean, you see the opening number where Conan and Ariana Grande pretend to be roommates for a musical number, and she talks about how weird he is, and it totally works. And like, I'm sorry, I'm writing that in my head now. But like, I think the shame here is that there's not an original song. I think, when you all were talking about what they add in, what they extend, is like, add in a song, man. Like just come up with one and find a space for it. So that's a shame. I only just found out that the song Saoirse Ronan performs in Blitz is an original song. So that's now my vote for what's going to win.
Winter Coat?
Yeah, I think that's the right one.
Is that what it's called?
So I think it's gonna clean up, and I said it to transition into this section. I'm putting my vote for Cynthia Erivo. I think she carries a lot more of this than is immediately evident, and just as much as I just praised Ariana Grande at times, like she's doing way more work, and it's way more interesting. And she does it all behind green makeup. Cynthia Erivo was in my household. We always put on the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, and when she was just sitting there, I was like, she looks so weird, not green. I haven't seen her not green because I go to AMC all the time, so I've been seeing Elphaba for like months and months and months, telling me to put away my cell phone. So it's really nice to see the real Cynthia Erivo, and I bet she delivers on stage for speeches. PT's right. It is only December. I don't know. Some crazy people, maybe the 3 people I was on this call with, just told me Golden Globe nominations come out on Monday. And that this is going to clean up at the Golden Globes because of the musical comedy factor. And it's just going to, set this on a blazing path of momentum through January. So I think this is going to do very, very well.
So yeah, I've been kind of going back and forth about what comps to use for this in terms of awards traction. And I keep coming back to Barbie because Barbie, like, even Greg said it, I think, at the beginning of our episode, that the cultural phenomenon factor does feel a lot like it did with Barbie. And that Barbie kind of struck out largely at the Oscars, right? People overestimated its performance. But I'd say that if I'm looking at those two films side by side, you could argue that Wicked has a lot more prestige behind it potentially for people because it's originally from Broadway, and it has connections to The Wizard of Oz, a beloved classic Hollywood film, right? Whereas Barbie was about a toy. And I love that movie, and I love Barbie. You know what I mean? Like I say that with much love, but if I'm thinking as a cynical Academy voter, that might make a difference in terms of how people are viewing the film and how snobby they're going to be about it. So it could break through. And I think in terms of narrative momentum, I totally agree with Greg that if it does super well at Golden Globes, it could get that huge boost. From a lot of pundits, I've heard the thing to watch out for is if it gets nominated for adapted screenplay, then it's go time. Like if it makes it in there, then it is a fierce competitor in Best Picture. And that if it sustains the momentum and maintains the kind of narrative appeal of its meeting, this is the movie we need this year, this is the movie we need to meet us in this moment, right? Then if it can keep that up, then I think it has a strong chance. But we also haven't seen A Complete Unknown, so
And don't forget Megalopolis. Megalopolis was
Okay,
the film
great.
we need right.
I will note I was skimming through the list of what's eligible for best original song, and My Pledge from Megalopolis is on the list because it is technically eligible. It's not on a short list; it's just on a list of what would count. Anyway, so it's funny you brought it up. I would say to what you said, Jen, all that tracks and makes sense. I would say the cynical and negative or at least like persuaded voters version of It's a Toy towards Barbie is this is just part one. And it's like, are we sure we want to reward half a story? Do we want to give something when it's like it isn't just like, oh, there's going to be a sequel and we know there'll be a sequel. It is delineated as part one, like in the movie. We all know there's another element, and that's the element they're going to be adding things to that we don't know because that's going to be new songs. Like, would they be okay? I think there will be a question, and again, this is campaigning from other people who are trying to like get their votes shifted over to whatever movie that they're working on or want to support. I think the whispering would be, are you sure you want to give this best picture if the next one sucks? Like, are you sure that you want to have rewarded this if the full story actually isn't that good? Don't you want to wait and see if it turns out that way? I don't know if that's fair because this is a movie. It's its own movie. Whatever. We've given best picture to movies that then got sequels, whether they were good or bad, didn't matter. But I think that's, to me, that's what I see as like, when the rubber's hitting the road, and it's not the Golden Globes, all due respect to whatever the Hollywood Foreign Press Association is now, but it's actually the Academy. I wonder if they'll be like, do we want this in the Pantheon when we don't know what's coming next?
I'll also add in the award history of Wicked, right? Like the stage version of this, the complete like part one and part two in one thing. It was a juggernaut on Broadway. It was the favorite to win Best Musical that year at the Tonys, and it was upset by Avenue Q, a show I also really love, and I actually was rooting for that year. Elle and Kristen Chenoweth were both nominated for lead actress that year in the same category, and Idina Menzel, who played Elphaba, won that year. So anyway, there's a little part of me that's a little anxious about predicting it for taking the win for Best Picture, because the stage version of Wicked couldn't win like its biggest award, then it's hard to imagine. It's difficult to imagine it with the movie version part one would, but we'll see.
Yeah, it'll be exciting to see how it sustains or does not sustain.
Jen, right now, do you think Ariana Grande is the favorite in Best Supporting Actress? On the spot, you gotta commit.
Yeah, I would say yes.
Okay,
but I think we have yet to reach the moment where Zoe Saldana shows up and everyone's like, "Oh, right." What were we thinking? Right? I think I sort of like Robert Downey Jr. last year. So I say she's favored, but again, the comp I've heard is to Ryan Gosling, who everybody loved and was happy he was nominated, but he didn't. I don't think he really some people were predicting him, but realistically, I think it was always going to be Robert Downey Jr. And so in that sense, but Robert Downey Jr. was playing a serious historical character. Zoe Saldana is also in another musical that is not going to be as popular, probably. So I don't know. Yeah, what does everybody else think? Like,
Well, you're forgetting how well Isabella Rossellini made copies. That she was really good hitting print and walking away from her screen. One other thing just in the mix, I actually don't want to answer that question, so I'll dodge. But I will say one thing when we're saying how popular this is and how it will really draw people to the awards, I'm also remembering how many Barbie fans were super angry after the awards last year. So I think it is a danger to nominate a very popular film like this for a bunch of categories and then not give it to it. Not for us, but like the number of people I saw saying like, "Oh, so the only person who won for Barbie was the man," and got really grumpy about that and didn't want to see any more. Like, I think the Academy is playing with fire a little bit, just throwing some popular nominations away. So that's my endorsement that somebody from this needs to win. Ariana Grande is a hard sell for me because I think it is not as great a performance as, I'd even say Saoirse Ronan in Blitz or Isabella Rossellini. It's one great scene, but it's a hell of a scene, right? So, I'm more in the camp of those two, knowing that it will piss off a lot of angry people, but make the Selena Gomez fans really happy. I still don't understand what's going on in that fight.
You didn't say you want Selena Gomez to win. Selena Gomez fans will not be happy with you. Apologies to all of our Selena Gomez.
Well, they clearly just haven't tried to
stands.
bribe you, right? Like,
Yeah.
Right.
Does everybody know about this news story?
I put it on the thread. They should, if they're reading my texts.
Yeah.
But the audience may not know, Jen, so why not say it?
That's more what I meant. Not our text thread. So yeah, presumably a fan of Ariana Grande has been emailing voters being like, here's a 3-page thesis about why you should vote for her. Also, I will bribe you if you need to. Right? I mean, they said it more subtly than that, but like, it's just really laughable and kind of embarrassing. And this poor person who wrote this like does not realize that actually is hurting the campaign. Right? So, yeah.
Well, one of the theories is that it's actually a Selena Gomez fan who's doing it to make Ariana Grande fans look bad. But that might just be something Ariana Grande fans are saying.
Oh my goodness.
Because then they can say it's not our fault. It's Selena Gomez's fans' fault that we look bad right now.
You're saying that the villain we all agreed was a villain might be a hero? I don't know.
I mean,
I don't know.
I don't know if that story is sustainable for 6.5 hours. Here's what I'll say about best supporting actress is, based on all you were saying, Jen, I do think that, obviously there's more momentum for Ariana Grande. I really liked her performance. I thought she was great in this. I feel less surprised because I've seen her on Saturday Night Live, where I'm like, yeah, of course she's funny, of course she's great doing, like, she has great comedic timing and can inhabit a character like that. But like, I think that she did it really well in this, and it's very fun in that Ryan Gosling zone of like, yes, like she has the most fun of anyone in this movie. I do wonder if, I'm trying to not piss off anyone here, especially Antonio, but the rise of Wicked, I do think has really lowered the ceiling for Emilia Perez, the reaction to that movie has been a lot shakier, and now everyone's like, "Whoa, but Wicked, like, actually, what about that?" And so I wonder if it actually maybe hurts, like, the success of Wicked across all these different avenues to get awards, hurts Ariana Grande, because people might quickly kind of consolidate around, well, Emilia Perez should get something. Why don't we give it Best Supporting Actress for Zoe Saldana? Maybe they'll just say, like Barbie, like Emilia Perez will just get song, and they'll be like, thanks for playing. And that will be enough for them. But I could see the arguments might start to become, well, but like Zoe Saldana is really good, and she's finally breaking out in the same way that Robert Downey Jr. broke out of his franchise-itis to get into a real movie. So is she able to get out of the Star Trek, Avatar, Marvel, and Lioness Special Ops franchises to get into a real acting performance. So I don't know. We'll see. It'll be interesting. But I do think Ariana Grande has the most heat individually from this movie.
I just love how she's scuttles and shuffles everywhere. And like that one scene where she's like on the floor, like across the floor, is just incredible. It's so funny. And just, yeah, all the looks. I've seen so many internet clips of people being like, look at Ariana Grande's face in the background of the scene. And yeah, so she's doing good work for sure. I would say that I agree with your argument, but I think Emilia Perez could just win Best Song.
Yeah, it's possible.
And that would be that. But yeah, so I don't know. A lot of people are taking Saoirse Ronan out of their predictions altogether. Like Blitz is like falling hard off the map. Like it's just
like a bomb from a plane.
It's okay. All right. Thank you everyone for seeing this movie and coming on to talk about it. All right, Antonio, where can folks find you? And I know there's only one place.
Find me on Letterboxd at Aelefano, AELEFANO. Greg, where can people find you?
I am currently doing co-hosting duties on the Rebel Base Card podcast as we talk about Skeleton Crew, the new Star Wars show that is inspired by all the old Amblin classics you love, especially like Goonies and so on. So people can find me over on that feed. And when not there, I'm on Instagram at IonCanon, EYEEONCANON. Join me on Letterboxd as I chase PT. I'm determined to get to 500 movies this year. I'm not sure I'm going to quite make it. I'm also determined to watch the last 13 Best Picture nominees I need. And somehow I have to watch Crash and Green Book and Driving Miss Daisy. Ooh, I got a rough
haven't
December
you seen
ahead.
some of those already?
Not those 3. So it's just the 13 left that I haven't seen.
Wow.
So
What idyllic bubble have you been living in?
I don't know. I used to go to movies that I wanted to see. Now I just go to whatever I have to fulfill Letterboxd stats. PT, where can people see your movie total?
They can find me on Letterboxd at PT McNiff, PTMCNIFF, and it's not complete throughout my entire life, but if it were, Jen could find out I also have never seen those 3 movies because they always looked bad. Even though in my heart, I love that Dan Aykroyd is an Academy Award nominated actor. So I enjoy Driving Miss Daisy conceptually for that reason, but whatever. You can also follow the show on Letterboxd at LTR Pod, and you can follow the show's social media feeds on Instagram and Threads. And I didn't mention this earlier, so if you stayed all the way through, congratulations for realizing we're also on Blue Sky. All of those are at The Long Take Review. And you can send us an email, thelongtakereview@gmail.com. Or you can follow Jen's Substack, thelongtake.substack.com, and you'll get all the information about the show in addition to all of the great written reviews that Jen writes. So that's a great place to do it. You can also just subscribe and leave a rating or a review wherever you're listening right now. So you can go ahead and do that. Follow us in all kinds of places. We'd love to have you. Jen, where can folks find you?
You can find me on Instagram and Threads at Sopchockchai, SOPCHOCKCHAI, and on Letterboxd at Qui-Gon Jen. And now I'm thinking we should do an Amblin movie episode during Skeleton Crew's run. I think that would be really fun.
Way down.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Do you want me to do the third verse of Not a Source Popular? Because I still have the lyrics up.
I was going to sing Unlimited, right? Like, yeah. We're the greatest podcast that there's ever been.
Mark it.
Thanks for listening. You can follow The Long Take Review on Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. Subscribe for free to receive new podcast episodes as well as written reviews of films with Oscar buzz and new films and series from pop franchises like Star Wars and Marvel.